Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Blether Together, the National's weekly show on news, views and politics from Scotland and around the world. My name is Stephen Paton. Joining me today is Richard Walker. Feel free to say hi. And also Angela Haggerty from Common Space. Thank you for both joining me on the show today.
And
we've also got a headless
Angus salmon
and a huge wee ginger dog.
Yep. So obviously, just wrapping up as we were saying, a Halloween edition since terrifyingly large dog and angry with no head. So just bugs to work out for next week's show, really. So it's been quite a busy week for news, actually. Is there anything kind of stood out for anyone in terms of like what they've taken away?
I was interested in the plans to set up a safe zone for drug addicts to inject themselves with heroin or whatever they want to, I suppose, in Glasgow. And the debate around that, I was kind of conflicted by it, I suppose, because I think clearly you don't want people who are addicted to drugs. You don't want them to have to risk all sorts of disease and by injecting in the middle of the street or in places that are not safe or clean. On the other hand, I get the argument that you don't want to make it too comfortable because your aim is to stop these people taking drugs at all. While I kind of in favour of the decriminalisation of drugs, I don't like the idea that that would then lead to more people taking them. So I think the suggestion or the argument that was put forward was put these people in a safe place, you put them in touch with people who will help them get off by giving them help in other ways. I don't think that works because I don't think there is that help available right now. And I think if we think we're solving the drug problem by this suggestion, I don't think we'll do that. I think it's part of a broader range of things that we should be providing and which we currently don't.
Okay, and so if you are tuning in just now, you are watching Blether Together, we do want to hear your comments as well, so please do leave any comments down below on what we're discussing, as well as any questions or your opinion on things too. First comment there from Nora Hunter as well, saying that drug addicts are humans too, so we should also be treating them in a humane way.
Absolutely, but we don't want them to be, we want to help them become not addicted, to beat their addiction if they choose to do so.
And of course, because historically the kind of war on drugs or the approach we've taken has failed drastically. It's just been an absolutely terrible approach. I mean, do you think, Angela, that it's time we came at things from a different perspective?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I agree with what Richard's saying, is that these things in isolation are no more likely to work. You need a broader strategy. You need a better strategy. I mean, I'm inclined to think that this isn't a step in the wrong direction. I mean, I think that you do have to provide some safety and compassion, I think, for people who are addicted to drugs or who are in that kind of a situation. We're very judgmental as a society. You still see on social media when you have these conversations about, words like junkies being used in a real kind of just disdain for people that have really fallen in a horrible rut. And I know addiction can be a destructive thing, but I don't know of anybody that ever wants to be in that position. So I know it's really gone out of fashion these days, but I'm still flying the flag for compassion. I think there's far too little of it, and I think that you get the best long-term results when you have patience and a bit of care.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite in favour of the drug rooms personally. I think it's a really good step because, I mean, the way that it's almost like, I guess, the kind of people who would be using it is that it's not necessarily for everyone who's using drugs. It's actually more focusing in, as far as I'm aware, in a very specific group, like a very vulnerable group, the kind of people who aren't able to reach out for help yet. And I think that the majority of drug users, when interviewed, said that what they want to see is a system that helps them become drug-free, which is really positive. But for some people who are in a particular position, that's just not an option that they can kind of go down yet. So I personally think that providing a place that almost gives them a safe space to be a little bit healthier, to then maybe make a more informed decision later on about to go down that route of looking for help, is probably going to be a more effective way of tackling a lot of the drug problem that Glasgow and wider specifically has.
I think it's a good thing as long as people don't think it's the answer. I think it's an answer to the safety question. I don't think it's necessarily an answer to how we help people get off drugs.
Yeah. Great. So let's move on from there. We've got a few people coming in actually who are talking about drug addicts specifically. There's a story behind everyone. Humans, again, we should be treating with compassion, like Angela was saying as well. So I think that's generally the feeling of people who are watching the show. So again, thank you for commenting, and please continue to do so. Let's move on to today's big news. So the big news today was the UK government losing a High Court case, which means that MPs are now going to get a vote on Brexit before Article 50 can be triggered. And this raises a lot of questions, because if the UK Parliament now moves to essentially vote against Brexit, that's going to raise this issue of the fact that a lot of people voted for Brexit because they were so frustrated that politicians weren't doing anything that they saw that had an impact on their lives, and maybe frustratingly, or some of them at any rate, lashed out and wanted to make a statement. And if those MPs then turn around and be like, actually no, you've had your wee vote, but leave it to us and go a different route, that's only going to make things so much worse. And I think what we'd probably see is, for the next UK government election, more UKIP MPs come back when supposedly their role is finished, since they've actually achieved the thing that they set out to do. I mean, Angela, do you think that having the UK Parliament move against the will of the people is a really bad move, or is it something that's going to maybe take into consideration a little bit more the fact that the vote was so tight and there was supposedly so much Brexit the morning after?
Well, firstly, I'm delighted that this ruling has brought up even more questions about Brexit, because I was beginning to think we were running out of them. It's just one thing after another. But no, I don't think that it's a good idea, because I think it sets, this may be deemed proper procedure by the courts, that it should go to a parliamentary vote, and that it may be a good thing that the court is doing that. However, should the MPs then use that ruling to effectively try and overrule Brexit, then I think it is setting a bit of a dangerous precedent, because if you put it in the context of a Scottish independence referendum, for example, say you have a second referendum and there's a yes vote, how would you feel if it was the will of the sovereign will of the UK Parliament to say that MPs could then overrule that? So I think you have to be thinking about bigger picture. It's not just about this issue, it's about how that rule then applies to other things. That said, I put this out on Twitter earlier on, views similar to that, and I'm surprised at the number of people coming back who disagree, who think that, who are saying that a referendum is only an advisory tool. It's not binding, it's not legally binding, and it only exists to advise parliamentarians to then go on and make a decision to do something with that recommendation from the people. So there's a lot of people out there, and remember, Brexit was a very tight vote. There's a lot of people out there that really don't want Brexit to happen. There's a lot of powerful people out there that don't want Brexit to happen. And I honestly don't know at this stage whether we can say for certainty whether it will or it won't. It still seems very much up in the air.
And do you think it'd be fair if Brexit didn't go ahead after?
No, I mean,
majority?
I didn't vote for Brexit. I voted to remain, but I can't see an argument which leads to Brexit not happening in some form. I think the problem is, what does Brexit mean? There are phrases.
Well, Brexit means Brexit, according to
of course. How stupid. But there are phrases now which are coming into popular usage, like hard Brexit and soft Brexit. I mean, these phrases were never heard before we actually voted, and now they're being put forward as some problems that we have to face. I mean, clearly, we voted to leave Europe. I wish we hadn't, but I can't see any outcome which that is not leaving Europe that fulfills the desire of the people that voted. So I think that's a problem for Theresa May. I kind of sympathise slightly, and she faces this problem, but her party caused it. David Cameron caused the problem by going for the referendum in the first place. Nobody seems to have thought anything beyond the vote, presumably because they thought they would win it, but they didn't even count it as losing it, and now they've lost it big time, and we're in complete disarray over what that means, what happens next. Whose fault is this? It's the Conservatives' fault. Who needs to sort it out? The Conservatives need to follow it out. And like Angela, I'm very concerned that we now kind of redefine what a referendum means, and that when we have our next independence referendum, which I obviously want the vote to be that we vote to make Scotland an independent country, if that happens and then we are faced with another whole bunch of court cases about whether that referendum is binding or not, I think we're in a really sticky position. And how do we ever achieve independence if the referendum mechanism is devalued?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the things, is that the Brexit people voted for was so badly defined that it could be soft Brexit, it could be hard Brexit.
Well, nobody even knew, to be honest. Is there such a thing as soft Brexit or even hard Brexit? It was just,
I mean, maybe that was a
we
dream.
want out of Europe. That's what they voted for. I didn't want it. I didn't want out of Europe, but clearly the vote was tight, but it was clear.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I don't see any way that the UK, or rather that Scotland, can remain in the EU and the UK if a fair democratic decision is made. I think the only fair democratic decision is unfortunately, as much as I wanted to remain part of the EU as well, I think it's only fair that the UK Parliament does move towards leaving the UK, taking the UK out of the EU. That's what the people of the UK voted for. I think it's the mandate of the Scottish MPs to oppose that, since Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain. But I just don't see how a democratic a decision can be made here that results in Scotland remaining in the UK and the EU.
Well, I don't agree with that, because I think if you look at the vote, clearly Scotland voted to stay within Europe. I mean, the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon is right to argue that to fulfil the wishes of both those referendums, she has to investigate a way of Scotland remaining within the UK and somehow remaining within the EU. And then those negotiations haven't started, so it would be wrong to say that it's utterly impossible. Europe is a very accommodating mechanism, so they can negotiate very many things. Whether this is possible remains to be seen, but I think she's right to try, and I think more importantly, she's right to be seen to try.
Just a thought though, I mean, if it's fair for SNP MPs to vote based on constituency, if this does have to go to Parliament, and they'll obviously vote to remain, or they would vote in that spirit, what about other MPs in the rest of the country? I mean, has there been a breakdown of constituency by constituency, whether they would have been leave or remain areas? Should MPs be taking that into consideration if they're constituency MPs? Because if that's what the SNP MPs are presumably going to do.
MPs aren't bound to vote in line with their constituents' feelings. I mean, constituents will have their own views on whether they don't, but they're not bound to do that. I'm not sure, what are they actually voting on? I mean, they can't be voting on the results of the referendum because they're clear, tight but clear. So they can't vote by the way we're voting not.
It's the terms.
Well, the terms have yet to be decided.
Well, no, they're voting on whether or not Article 50 is triggered.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah. So,
I mean,
in that circumstance, then I don't see. I mean, this is just, I'm relaying some of the stuff that I was getting back from Twitter, really more than. I mean, this has only just been announced in the last few hours, and it's incredible actually how much people were getting into constitutional law on my Twitter timeline.
It's amazing how many experts in that there are out there.
Yeah, I mean, some people actually do know what they're talking about. You can see that they have some understanding of it. Other people, it's really just kind of much lighter, theoretical ideas. But yeah, I was surprised that the kind of will among people that I still see on social media to try and find a way to prevent Brexit, which does seem to me to be undemocratic. I mean, this is kind of a democratic crisis in a sense that I haven't experienced before, where we're actually examining the very nature of what we think democracy means in this country, and it's happening for very different reasons in different parts of the country, all simultaneously at the same time. We're now even having UKIP people on Twitter and the Daily Mail, I think, furious at the judiciary, furious at the judges today because of their ruling.
Yeah.
And a real kind of lack of understanding among people on social media about why we have that bit of our country, how that relates to Parliament, how the state relates to all of these institutions within it. I mean, it just kind of shows up that there's such a lack of understanding of how actually our country, very fundamentally, is run. And
but would that mean if we had
it's
another
quite
independence referendum and Scotland votes to become independent, does that mean that would then have to be ratified by a Westminster Parliament? I'm not very comfortable with that idea.
No, I agree. I think it's a bad idea, but I'm surprised at the number of people, and particularly sometimes from what I think are yes voters on social media, kind of making that argument for trying to find a way around Brexit. And I'm thinking, but that absolutely would come back to bite you in the event of a second referendum.
I suppose what they're saying is that there is a greater good beyond democracy, I suppose, but I think that's a hard argument.
That's a dangerous road to go down, because who defines that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I guess you could argue more specifically that when people were voting for Brexit, they had no idea what that meant, and there is a case to say that it was not badly defined, it was just not defined at all. So therefore, how can you take somebody's vote because seriously when they don't actually know what they were voting for? Very
maybe what happened in Ireland is what will happen. It goes to a second referendum.
Well,
it's possible. I mean, a lot of people don't agree with that idea either. That's this idea of never-ending. Keep having referenda until you get the right answer. But it was a tight vote, and there does seem to be some question over whether people actually understood what they were voting for. Maybe there could be circumstances to call a referendum on the terms of Brexit or something like that.
There's a thin line though between arguing that people didn't understand what they were voting for and then taking it a step further, which some people are doing,
Yeah.
saying that actually people aren't smart enough to take that decision, and that's a very, very dangerous argument when you.
And there has been that on social
Yeah,
media, because a lot of
absolutely.
people keep coming back to me and saying, well, if you listen to the public, you'd have the death penalty. Sometimes it's good to not listen to the
Well,
public.
that's why we haven't had a referendum on the death penalty,
yeah.
because that's probably what we would
And
have.
it's something as well that we've at least seen, at least some of the discussion around Scottish independence as well as, well, maybe, like, for example, the discussion we had last week on these anti-BBC billboards, which seem to almost be founded on the predication that people weren't necessarily smart enough to get their news from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And that's not, in my opinion, a good way to approach.
No.
Looking at some of the comments coming in at the moment, basically exactly what we're saying there, we've got David Brown talking about how is it still democratic if people were misled over so much of what leaving the EU actually entails. We also have a bit of a side comment from Ian Marshall saying that the wee ginger Doug behind should be in Question Time, even if it's a cutout. It would make more sense than the people on it. So
I'd
a wee
watch
bit of a,
that.
yeah, I'd watch that.
Absolutely.
Good point.
So one of the other interesting things to come out of this as well is actually not a second referendum on Brexit, but actually a discussion of an early election.
Oh, I can't take another election.
Oh, no, I could take-
rule it
I-
out?
just-
I've
let's
had
just have
enough
another one.
elections.
But the-
No, I'm in favour of these votes. I would have one of these votes much more often, to be honest. And certainly
Every 6
I
months,
would
keep it interesting.
I would like one on the independence of Scotland very, very soon, please.
Well,
Thank you very much.
we can have that one.
Thanks.
The idea at least behind the idea at least behind another election is that it would give Theresa May a mandate to push whatever version of Brexit that they were in fact talking about. So if it's hard Brexit and they call an election and the Tories return with another majority, it means they've got a mandate to move forward with it. The issue being that if they called an election just now, they wouldn't so much get a mandate on Brexit, so much as if Labour just doesn't get itself together in time, that could really be the reason why the
Right.
Tories return in the majority. So it's kind of a
Sounds to me very much like another referendum on Europe. by
that's
another
essentially
name.
what it is
Yeah.
by a different name.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's something to look out for. So that'll be really fun. We can have another election with all of the EU politics tied in with all of the Scottish
Great.
constitutional question. Let's just keep things moving.
Yeah.
But on the discussion of an independent Scotland, since we were bringing that up, another piece of news this week was that Reform published a report stating that GERS figures are basically meaningless when it comes to looking at whether or not Scotland could be an independent country, something a few of us have been saying for a while. Now, when the GERS figures first came out, I remember having this discussion saying that they were already meaningless because either side of the camp, either yes or no, could look at those figures and they can make an argument that backed up what they wanted to say. The yes camp would say, well, look at this, it just shows that Scotland and the Union is a mess, we need to be free the Union to go our own way. And the no camp could say, look at these figures, Scotland's such a financial basket case it can never survive on its own. So therefore there was not really too much that you could take away from it. This report that's come out seems to actually kind of more lean towards the yes side, saying that the figures only show how Scotland functions within the Union and not outside of it. So basically saying that if we were independent, Scotland would take a different direction. And it's something as well that Commonwealth's been working on, like Craig Dyle published a report recently looking at a lot of this and sort of showing some of the ways that Scotland's deficit could be reduced if removed from the Union and how GERS would reflect that. So, for example, we had a proportional share of defence spending put into the GERS report when in fact Scotland would not spend nearly as much in defence as it does just now as part of the United Kingdom. I mean, Richard, did you ever think that GERS was an accurate reflection of Scotland's
No, I never
place
thought about it.
in the
What I do think is that the economic argument is a difficult one to answer and a difficult one to connect with because, as you say, that there is never an economic argument which the no side would say, yeah, absolutely, Scotland should go for independence. They're always going to either say, things are going really well in Scotland just now, what do you want independence for? Or things are going really badly in Scotland economically, what on earth do you think you would do when you were independent? It's going to be worse for you there. So there's no scenario under which they're better together than no side would jump up and say, oh yes, Scotland should be independent. They're never going to say that. So it's, I guess, the independence side's responsibility to try and put together some economic case. I suppose you'd have to come to the conclusion that the case put forward for the 2014 referendum was not convincing enough, and therefore, when it comes to the next referendum, then more work has to be done, and maybe being done for all I know, I don't know. More work needs to be done to make that case stronger, but it's never going to be definitive. In the last referendum, when the Sunday Herald, after it came out in favour of yes, we tried to do articles which would be an unbiased economic view of Scotland's health, and it's very difficult to find economists that both sides would agree or do not have an agenda.
Yeah, I think we actually just published an opinion piece today by Gary Elliott, one of our columnists, and he's saying similar things to you, Richard. Just that the idea that there's almost something become a bit conspiratorial around Jers, where it's kind of sunk into that these figures are always weighted against Scotland, therefore we are always on the back foot. It's unfair, etc., etc. But that doesn't speak to no voters. You know, if you say that the economy's fine, it's just that the figures are rigged against you. You're not going to get anyone giving you a vote on that on the basis of that. It's all about spin. When it comes to things like economic figures, it's all about spin. That's what people on either side of a divide will do. They will take the same figures and they can spin them in wildly different directions and make a convincing case for it. So I think the yes side just has to accept that that is the nature of that when you're arguing in a second independent referendum. And like you say, they just have to make sure that their case, their economic case, is so much stronger than the first time around, perhaps, and that's what's going to get them over the line. That's what will convince people. So, absolutely. Yeah, I think we do in the Yes movement, I think, talk a lot about Jers figures, and I sometimes wonder whether people outside of those bubbles really care about it at all, whether it's remotely on their agenda. I suspect it's not. So I think the focus is maybe unhelpful.
The difference now to 2014 is, I guess, that. Right, in 2014 it was still possible, we would argue against what people that made this case, but it was still possible to make the case that the union was the safer option, or at least the more secure option, or the option we were most comfortable. I don't think you can make that case now, because whatever the situation is with Westminster and the union now, safe and secure are not words that jump into your mind. It's completely chaotic, so we're not facing the unknown with security. That's not the argument just now. It's not the choice.
Yeah, there was the recent petition that came forward as well for England to kick Scotland out of the Union. And one of the interesting
love
bombing. Thanks, guys. One of the things I found quite amusing was that one of the things we floated around that was that rather than having to be the way of the last referendum, if this somehow came to pass, the UK would have to make the reasons why Scotland should stay, and only then would Scotland's true worth be fully discussed in an open way. At which point we go, all right, great, and we're on our way. I think you're both right that Jers will always just be something that can be used by either side. Really, we need to be addressing bigger things in Jers, such as where we want to be investing our money, for example, putting more money into renewables to build up an industry to replace depleting fossil fuels. We need to be discussing currency and whether or not we want to move to an alternative one, which is one of the things that actually frustrated me slightly recently with I think it was Fergus Ewing, but I don't want to jump the gun, but someone within the SNP saying that, well, the next referendum we might be talking about a currency union a second time with the pound. And it's just like, no, don't do that, because it just didn't work the last time. And I mean, I personally think that being an independent country means you can go different monetary routes if you have your own investment bank and everything else. But
I think that nobody should have to work on a Friday, by the way.
Exactly.
Which I think,
do you want legislation?
I think if we talk about these bigger issues, it's a certainty to
us. In an independent Scotland,
never work on Friday.
4-day working week. There you go.
That's a winner.
To be fair, she didn't say a 4-day working week. She
just
said you
no
don't
Fridays.
work on Fridays. You might have to work Saturday and Sunday.
So 60
way about Fridays, by the way.
It's fine. But yeah, exactly. I think you're right that the independence movement's gotten a little bit caught up in Jers, and there's other areas we really should be looking at just now. Yeah. Great. So another interesting thing happening is the legislation passing on the Offensive Behaviour at Football Act. So Angela, I know you're going to have stronger feelings in this. So do you want to kick off this slightly more controversial one by giving us a brief rundown of what the OBFA is and its kind of history? Because I assume you know it.
Well, I was going to kick off with a song, or should we?
Oh, sure, let's. We're not going to join in. Let's say
see my editor running across the room like, kill it, kill the feed.
Right, so Offensive Behaviour at Football Act came around about 2011 time. This is around when Neil Lennon was at Celtic, the Celtic manager. There was a lot of stuff going on around that time. He'd been attacked as a manager. There had been trouble at Old Firm games. There had been explosive devices sent in the post, not just to him, but to a parliamentarian and to a lawyer, Paul McBride. So things really had ramped up. People were quite frightened. There was a public mood of discontent around all of that stuff. People did want action. And so the Scottish Government took action in the form of creating the Offensive Behaviour at Football and Threatening Communications Act. However, it has always been controversial because campaigners and lawyer people like that alike have all said that there are problems with the law, that it doesn't make for good law, that it could potentially be criminalising what things that are offensive but that maybe shouldn't be criminal, like political expression. Also that it just doesn't work very well, that it's made the relations between football fans and the police really very poor. There's been a breakdown there, and that's not good for the overall aim of tackling sectarianism. And there's also, you know, from my personal experience of being a football fan and just watching this unfold on Twitter and social media and going to football games, before the Act, there was a conversation happening within football fan groups about singing certain types of songs at football and whether it should happen. And there had been a movement beginning to really emerge against some of these songs, and they had maybe continued to sing the same songs or the same tunes, but they started to change the lyrics to take the most offensive bits out. So they were starting to self-police to some extent, at least. After the Act, people felt like they were so under attack that the best way to oppose it was to all kind of collectively get back, you know, get the kind of songbook back together to show that they won't be defeated. It became a very defensive thing because people felt like it wasn't sectarian speech that was being necessarily outlawed, but it was being political speech. So this gets very, very, very complicated, and I think, if anything, it's actually set the cause of getting rid of those songs backwards rather than put it forwards. So I don't think it's worked. And I think that if your main objective is actually to tackle sectarianism and to change public attitudes, then this doesn't seem to be doing it. If anything, those divides seem to be getting deeper and deeper. So, to me, the question is it effective? And I don't think that we're seeing the evidence that it is.
So, Rich, what do you think?
Not that.
Good debate.
I think you look at what the legislation is designed to achieve, and I think you ask yourself as well whether the opposition parties are motivated by a desire to really get to grips with the sectarian problem in Scotland, or by a desire just to give the SNP a bloody nose. And I think it's the latter there, mostly. That's not to say there aren't real concerns about sectarianism, but to be honest, we've had a sectarian problem in Scotland for a while. I think it's been getting better in many ways, but we still have examples of it at football matches, and I suppose the most obvious example are the songs that Angela mentioned. I don't go to football, I don't, but I have heard the songs, I find them objectionable, and I don't want anything to do. And the legislation which existed prior to this particular act was not solving that problem. It went on continually. They may have changed.
But it still goes on.
It still goes on, but I think that it's less so, and that's just a sort of gut level instinct. That's true. That's true. But I see it on television sometimes, very occasionally, and out with football. And out with
this is not a scientific method of measuring sectarianism.
Well, what is a scientific method of measuring sectarianism? There is none.
But I think as a country, there is less of a problem in the country, and it's still confined largely to football, I think. I don't think it's... I mean, there was a time where there are certain newspaper companies that I was brought up a Catholic, I no longer practice, but there were certain newspaper companies in Scotland that I could not have worked for at one time because of my religion. That is not the case now. I don't know of anywhere in Scotland that being a Catholic, or indeed being a Protestant, would be difficult in terms of getting employment there anymore. So I think we've come some way along those lines. I think it's mainly obvious now at football matches. I think the legislation maybe has some problems if judges are not going to impose it, or are not going to impose the relevant sentences when somebody is found guilty of those offences, and I think that needs to be looked at. But I think that it came from a good place. I think its desire was good. I think it's had some effect, and I think that generally it's better to do something than to do nothing, which seems to be the opposition's alternative in this case?
That's not the opposition's alternative in the case, though, because the argument is consistently been for building community links, for trying to overcome bad social attitudes through education, and for going down the road of strict liability, which takes much, much greater punishment on the clubs rather than individual football fans, which actually, in the grand scheme of things, hasn't seemed to be effective at all, because the songs are sung just as much as they were before, if not more. So it's not a case that there is no alternative to this. There is an alternative to it. People say that, you know, there's an argument that legislation is not the thing that's going to fix bad social attitudes that are rooted in a very, very deeply political situation that goes back decades, and that actually what you're doing is you're rounding up 16, 17, 18-year-old boys and giving them a criminal record. Is that actually helpful, or is that just creating a fresh wave of this problem? So I don't think that it's about whether people think sectarianism is bad or not, and it's been kind of portrayed that way a bit in social media, that if you oppose the act, that you just don't care about sectarianism, or you actually like these songs, or that there's something more sinister going on. It's not so much the case. The question is what is actually going to work, and I don't know really what this law criminalises in any significant way that wouldn't have already been criminal before. But what has happened since it is we've seen the surveillance from the police at football matches massively increase. They stand with cameras pointed at football fans. There's been cases of football fans going into football stadiums wearing like a Palestine t-shirt or having a flag or something, and those being confiscated because that is considered to be offensive behaviour.
By the police.
By the police, but
I'm not sure by the courts.
No, but the law, alongside the introduction of that law, gave the police a lot more power. I think also the police could issue, I think there was something about they could issue football banning orders without necessarily having to go to court first. So it did give the police more powers. And a lot of money has been put into this. And to go to a football match and have something confiscated like a Palestine flag or a t-shirt because that's considered to be offensive behaviour, I think that's worrying, and I think it's worrying that that is a criminal offence at a football game, but it isn't a criminal offence elsewhere. That, for example, Orange Walks, you can sing some of those offensive songs on an Orange Walk and march through the streets of Scotland, but if you do it at a football game, that's criminal. It's kind of setting football fans separately, as if they're a subsection of society that have to be dealt with as thugs. And I think that there's a class issue there as well. Sometimes with football fans, that people see them as a problem, they need to be dealt with.
Yeah, I mean, do you think
a lot of issues with that?
Yeah, do you think that maybe we should actually be listening a little bit more to the fans in this one? I mean, you do have organisations like Fans Against Criminalisation popping up who are saying that a lot of people going on to these matches are not going on to cause trouble, but they're essentially being treated as criminals when they arrive all the same because of the OBFA, and trying to find a different way of approaching how to tackle sectarianism. I mean, would you say that we should be listening to kind of the grassroots fans on this?
I don't think the views of the grassroots fans are irrelevant, but I'm not sure they're paramount in this case. I know that you'll find this difficult to believe, but I am actually older than you, Angela, so
No.
I know it's hard. And all the alternative ways of dealing with sectarianism that you've mentioned have been tried for years and years and have had not a significant effect on behaviour at football matches. So if they haven't worked, I'm not sure why the opposition parties are holding these up as, let's try this, instead, as if, these are some great ideas that we've just come up with. These ideas are old ideas and have proved to be ineffective. So, but now they've done what they've done. Now what we have to do is try and find some reasonable way of making sure that objectionable, vile songs are not sung in public, not just at football matches. Absolutely, you've got some absolutely valid points about the differences between singing these songs at football matches and, for example, at Orange Walks. Those are valid points. But now we have to look and find out how we can make sure that certain songs are not sung in public. And I know that's a tricky situation, what song is sectarian, what isn't.
Exactly.
But I think there are some songs with certain lyrics. It would be very hard to argue that those lyrics are not offensive.
Okay, and that's going to start to bring us towards the end of this week's programme. We've overrun slightly.
Richard and I are going to go and have a fight.
Right.
This fight.
Absolutely.
I will be live streaming the entire thing.
I'm not going to hit anybody.
Just in case. It starts to bring us to the end of the programme, so just one last thing I wanted to discuss with you. And if you do have any thoughts on the OBFA, please do leave them down in the comments below, and we'll try and get to them before the end, but unlikely at this
Just
point.
don't tweet any more of them.
Just
to me.
nothing.
We've had enough.
Yeah.
So actually, if you do want to tweet them, there's Angela's Twitter account. If you want to let Angela know exactly how you feel
Thanks
about the
very
OBFA,
We're
I'm here
like,
to help.
We're like Susan May. We're interested in what you think, but we're not going to act on it.
No. Let's wrap up this week's programme by discussing one last quick thing. This week it kind of came out that Ewan McGregor said that immediately after the Brexit vote, even though he had been in support of the union before, he would have voted to leave the morning after. Maybe it's not necessarily something he still believes. It might just been a sort of a very reactionary thing. But do celebrities actually influence politics in the way that people listen to them and go, yeah, you know what, that sounds like something I'm more interested in? Angela, what do you think?
Yeah, I think they do. I don't think that people make their minds up because a celebrity has said something, but I think it's one of those things that adds a certain legitimacy or authenticity to something sometimes. So you think if you have a name that is generally respected and that there's an image associated with that brand, because that's what celebrities become, they become brands, then when they back something political, then I think that it does lend it some legitimacy. When you think of, like, I don't know, maybe figures like Donald Trump, for example, what would have seemed to be something insane a few years ago, the very idea that someone like Donald Trump could get close to the White House. Actually, that's when you see like endorsements actually do have an effect, because it softens that kind of public no, that can't happen, can it? Attitude to, oh, well, maybe it could happen because so-and-so thinks it could. That's why in the independence referendum, you'd see photo calls that the SNP would try and do with the most famous people that they could that were on their side and get them all in front of a camera, because I think it does add something to it. And Ewan McGregor's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good one.
Great. Richard?
I'm quite shallow, so yeah, I quite like celebrities backing things differently. I think it depends on the celebrity. Some would carry more weight than others, but they can have incredible power. When Taylor Swift was talking about the amount of money artists get from streaming companies, streaming music, that injected that debate into the public sort of discourse, and I think that's a hugely powerful tool at the disposal of political parties and political campaigns. So yeah, if Ewan McGregor says something about independence, which he did, you saw the effect of that, and it kind of enlivened the debate for a while. I think the National put it on the front page. They got hundreds and hundreds of retweets. So yeah, the power of celebrity, for good or for ill, is significant in our culture, and it would be ridiculous to pretend it was not so.
Yeah, I think in any kind of well-run campaign, there tends to be sort of three approaches, I found, which is the logical argument, the emotional argument, and the social argument. And definitely the social argument is very much being seen to be supported by people who are very visible, as well as obviously stickering and everything else. But yeah, I think so. I tend to agree as well. I don't know if it maybe makes anyone make their mind up, but I think it's the kind of thing that if you constantly hear people that you like and respect sort of speaking out in favour of something, you're at least more inclined to go away and look into it more yourself. So, yeah. But I imagine there will be a lot of disagreement out there on this particular subject, and we do want to hear it. Put it into the comments down below.
And also,
obviously.
the Trainspotting 2 trailer just came out today.
It did.
And
It looks good.
pretty good. If you
After
haven't
this,
seen it.
could we go to the chip shop around the corner? The one that Bieber went to? Because clearly that's going to be the best chip shop to go to now, because Justin Bieber says so.
Oh,
So,
Really?
Yeah,
Justin Bieber was.
Yeah, he was at a chip shop around the corner. Yeah. Do you not know that?
no.
Follow
Richard
it.
must be the resident Justin Bieber fan.
The believer.
I'm a believer.
The believer of the
Right.
office.
I'm definitely a believer.
Just,
Yeah.
whew, and on that bombshell, brings us to the end of this week's show. So if you don't want to follow any of us on Twitter, our names and whatnot are all on the bottom of the screen just now. We probably say interesting things, usually about politics and news and Justin Bieber, apparently. Occasionally Justin Bieber.
And wine.
And wine and video games from me, if we all have our specific niche. Please do join us again next week, 3 p.m. every single Thursday. Thursday. Angela and I will be back again, as well as another special guest. Who knows who that could be? I don't, but we'll work it out before then. Yeah, if you did like the show, please do leave us some love, subscribe, and leave any comments below of any feedback or ideas you have or things you'd like to see in the future. Of course, we want to hear them. Thank you for tuning in, and we will be back next week at 3.